What if we're no longer the apex? Now, Shanice talked about not empathy, you said apathy, right? If this entire structure was changed, right? I hope this does not happen, because if it does, and if the same rules that we've applied to everything below us was applied to us, and where a fat, juicy human is now a food source for another species. I put octopus because they are freaking smart. They're the reason. I don't need octopus because of how smart they are. It's a very conscious decision on my end. But how would we want to be treated if we were no longer apex, but this entire structure was still exactly the same? What'd you say, man? Cats. We would be their cats. I could see that, actually. Yeah. Of all the things, I would rather probably be a cat, because I'd be left alone. I could eat whenever I want. I could poop in the box and be like, clean it. You know? But it matters that when we're designing the built environment, again, whether we are in construction management, or we are doing furniture, or we are designing buildings or entire neighborhoods, that we keep this in mind and we design the environment how, if we were the product, how do we want to be treated? Moving on with that same logic, with that same thought process, if that apex predator trumps all of ours, I keep adding predator, my just verbiage, I got used to saying that, how would their weapons exponentially go up and be affecting us as human beings? It's important that on a day-to-day basis, whenever we're interacting with the internet, whenever we're buying something off of Amazon, if we know that a certain product is using slave labor for us to have it, are we still willingly choosing to do so? I had a discussion with a professor, I want to say about 2 years ago. He was talking about that idea of saying, hey, I am well aware that every cell phone that we have, every tablet that we have, or anything that uses this thing that called a lithium ion battery is using slave labor. A child worked in a field for us to have these devices. And he goes, I'm well aware of that. The amount of positive influence that I can have, I'm maximizing it to the best of my ability. I'm hoping the world will change. I'm not a psychopath, although one could say that all of us are a little bit psychopathic if we know that that's existing and we're still choosing to use those. But then we go, well, the rest of society is using it. How can I stay in line with everyone else unless I have that? So it's this kind of weird conundrum where we're like, okay, so animals are suffering and we're eating them. We have these areas where they're living, where they're sleeping in their own poop, and yet we're eating that, and we're okay with that. We know that slavery is happening and that our products are being used, our products are being purchased, and the influence for us to purchase even more, we know that's a system. How would that reality differ if we were part of another apex predator's reality? All right, let's move on with that same structure. So, as we already discussed, the urban environment is multifaceted. There's multiple things that contribute to make our reality, the built environment. So when it comes to influence, who has the, I'm going to try to find a different word than power, but who does have the power to influence law? Who has the power to influence urban design, street widths, who gets elected, who does not get elected? We reached a point in our reality where the majority of the masses advocate that this is a very fair template, that 11 companies basically rule the world in terms of products that we have, whether it's the water bottles that we're carrying, whether it's the phones that we're using, whether it's the cereal that we're having, whether it's the medication that we're consuming. All of that plays into it. If you were to guess a corporate-owned reality, what can be some of the detriments or some of the downsides to it? Link it to urban planning. If a company has so much wealth that they see an apartment complex that has value to them, let's follow that thought process. What can happen with that? And remember, whatever your answer is, take it on a mass scale, because it's not just one apartment complex that's owned by a corporation. It's usually several. What changes, or how is a person who's living in an apartment complex, how has their experience changed from saying, oh man, the sink stopped working, let me call the manager, or you know what, I'm just going to walk over. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, how are you, manager? It's good to see you. How's the husband? How's the kids? How's life? By the way, our sink isn't working. When you have time, I'm not doing anything today. Do you mind helping me fix it? Cool, awesome. Thank you so much. How does that change from a person-led or a community-based help to a corporation? When you add that barrier where a company is now running your apartment complex and you have to call a 1-800 phone number because your sink or your toilet is no longer working and you have a party coming up in 15 minutes, what are you to do, right? And it's unfortunate because San Diego is now going through that because it's completely legal. If we have a corporation and we have enough money, we can buy as many complexes as we want, kick out whoever we want to kick out because that's legal, which is a form of gentrification as well, pushing out the existing people for the sake of others who, in your mind, can afford more. And because they can afford more, they're higher class citizens. And because they're higher class citizens, they'll be less troublesome, and so on. And so you're continuing to mold reality for everyone, taking families away, making sure that you have single places for professionals. Corporate-owned realities also means that they can hoard money, right? Companies like AT&T have spent, I think their last merger was like $80 billion. And to pause for a second and say what the word billion is. We all have the capability of saying billion. We can also say the word million. But at this point, let's do a little quick thing. It'll take no more than 2 minutes. If you were right now in your mind's eye, unless you have aphantasia, do any of you guys have aphantasia? No? Do you know what that is? The ability to not imagine. So if I say imagine a circle and cut it in half, there is no mind's eye where you see a circle, I see a ball over here, I slice it in half, and then I can, without actually holding a ball, I can actually look at it like, okay, so it would have 2 flat surfaces and 2 domes on either. There are people that don't have that ability. Absolutely fascinating. People who have aphantasia can also be artists, but they have to literally use a picture and then play around with that. There's no way of them saying, I wonder how it can be with a blue background. They literally have to do a blue background and be like, okay, I get it now. So anyways, so let's do this experiment. I want you with your mind's eye to imagine 1 dot and only 1 dot. Pretty easy, right? Now I want you to imagine 2 dots. Put them side by side. Not too bad. Twice as many. But now 4 dots. Imagine, okay, I remember looking at a dice before, and I know the 4, it's 2 and 2. Now if I say 8, can you guys imagine 8 dots? Actually focus on the 8 dots. How about 10? Probably split them up maybe 5 and 5, right? How about 20? Try to count them in your mind's eye. How about 30? Now, when we talk about hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, and we start using those numbers, there's a certain part that the human brain is just not evolved enough to understand. So if I say $1 million, you guys, I could guarantee you, will not be able to imagine what $1 million looks like. But then if I say $1 billion or 1 billion pennies, something so thin that if I were to put side by side by side by side, I'll see if I can find a video for next class and show you. This one guy, what he does is he does the math to find out how much a penny's thickness is. A penny. Puts it on one side of a park and then puts 10 next to each other. Then 100. Then 1,000. Then he goes, I'm not going to waste my money. I'm not going to go to a bank and get all these pennies. But since we know math, I'm going to do the measurement. So he goes on Google Maps, figures out how much the distance is, and 1 million pennies ended up taking him, I could be a little bit off, but I think it was a couple miles worth of pennies for 1 million. Now, 1 billion is an exponential rise from 1 million. 1 billion pennies actually went cross state lines, which blows my mind. The tool is also there. I'll give it to you guys so you can figure out how much is 1 billion units of anything. So when we have corporations that have an $80 billion purchase, what does that actually mean? So in terms of other stuff, pollution obviously is a very big byproduct of the corporate-owned reality. Doesn't change until enough people actually protest about it. And even then, when those companies are putting certain politicians in place, whether people complain or they don't complain, they're still going to have that power. Next up, we talked about the urban environment and sprawl. Again, take away good or bad. It is only logical for a company to buy a whole bunch of land and make it as efficient as possible. You want to cram as many people as possible here so you can make as much money as possible. It is legal, it is fair, it is how we do things. From an urban planner standpoint, this is what hell on earth looks like. I honestly believe if the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran, and any religion, if their major texts were to say, this is what hell looks like, so be a better person, I think we would all be better people. So it's kind of scary, right? Removing identity for the sake of profit. Great minds all seem to agree that, hey, we're reaching a point where we're about to fall off a cliff. Something has to change. We do have science, without a doubt. We do have technology, without a doubt. This would not exist unless we had something called the scientific method. A camera could not exist unless there was iterations done where someone goes, you know what? I know we have two people in a booth where you can't see them and they're holding puppets so that children can see. What if we don't have to do that, but we can replay that so someone can watch it at any time? That idea had to happen using these methods. But those same methods are the same ones that are breaking down our civilization. Now, also when you guys were on break, we ended up talking about one of these two movies. With the show of hands, who's seen either one or both? Let's talk about Idiocracy first. In short, Idiocracy presents a future where corporations run the world rather than philosophical conversations, rather than having artists design the reality, rather than having people with PhDs and master's degrees or singers. You're just a consumer. You're just reduced down to a unit that purchases stuff, and you allow this machine to keep going. Our reality, what we have, from both a celestial, so from the super macro view to the micro view, we have nothing but beauty on planet Earth. The fact that our planet and our moon, its distance to the sun can give us an entire solar eclipse is mind-boggling. That's a mathematically improbable thing to happen, at least that we know of with the current tools that are at our disposal. But yeah, being told what to think, being told what to do, being reduced to a consumer, whether you're on planet Earth or on a spaceship. Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate and I'm going to hop on his side for a little bit. How people define the good life can only be based on what the environment affords them. On the ship, you had security in terms of food, you had water, and you can choose any type of clothing you want as long as it's blue or red. That's what was available. So in that bubble that they call a spaceship that's traveling the universe, they could have looked outside if they wanted to. They could have ran on that treadmill and exercised and actually been slim. For us being on planet Earth, we're using two different templates to judge what the good life is. I hope all of you guys agree with what I'm about to say, but the whole indefinite punishment for the sake of whatever someone did 1,000 years ago, 700 years ago, one generation ago has nothing to do with my actions. So if my great-grandfather killed your great-grandfather, we can still be friends because I have zero beef with you and you have zero beef with me. I'm going to judge you based on how our interactions are. Thank you for that, by the way, Paul. Appreciate it. So you guys, I hope all know about this. This is on the very first page in Alvin Toffler's First Wave, where he talks about what the issue is. If you have an entire group of people that says, hey, the end is near, you can go about one of two ways. Either roll over and die, which for the most part, people will not do that, or you pick up arms and you choose survival. Who doesn't want their mother to continue living a nice and happy life? Or their father, or their child, or their brother, or their sister, or their neighbors, their community. When you have prestigious think tanks that mold the information, be like, hey, and the world is coming, look at this amazing movie that we're spending millions and millions of dollars on. Was it Endgame? Was that it? the Avengers, the last one where everyone was killing the crap out of everyone. When you have the entire media platform flooded with movies that are like that, you're molding the people. You're having them think in a very specific way. That versus, hey, we're living in a Star Trek world where like we're literally equal. Who you are as a person, your dignity, your moral belief system is how I'm going to judge you and how I'm going to interact with you.
So I don't know.
It's valid, yeah. Or even worse, withholding information. If a particular government exterminates an entire village and no one has any idea that it happened, you're withholding vital information. If I throw a proposition out there and because you're at a certain education level, you're of a certain gender, you have a certain background, you live in a certain neighborhood, I'm only targeting this amount of information to you so that you have a visceral response to it and act on that. But then everyone else, I'm making sure they see a different picture. That's a form of manipulation versus saying, hey, everyone has access to all the information. A point on that, and this is one of the weirdest things. Are you guys into poetry by any chance? So bless you, there's this poet that I ended up finding out because my uncle was a very big fan of him. So what I tried to do is I tried to look up this poet. He's been long dead. And I went on the Googles, I went on to the Oracle and I said, Dear Google, I want to know everything there is to know about this poet. Lo and behold, I got nothing. And I'm like, hold on, but in Iraq, they've dedicated an entire street where vendors are selling his poetry, his books, his art. He matters to a big group of people, but I found nothing. I reached out to my cousin who lives abroad. And I was like, hey, cousin, have you heard of this poet? Of course, who hasn't heard of this poet? So I told her, I'm like, I cannot find any information about him. She goes, hold on, I got you. Sends me the first PowerPoint, the second PDF, second PDF, third PDF, fourth PDF, additional resources through her internet where they had the gates open that she could research anything that she wanted. So even here in the United States, in the freest country, we still have that as well on poetry. Not even politics, not even news, not even mass genocides or killing. Poetry. Yeah.
I'll give you a moment in time where I realized that I can't really say what I want to say. I was in basic training, and we were all having a discussion about America being free and what. I said, no, you guys aren't free. Like, you don't know real freedom. Like, as an immigrant, I can definitely tell you that you guys, oh my gosh, I should not have said that. I was annexed. Like, they
Immediately,
were so anti me. They were just like, what do you mean? This is the freest country on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Da, 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 da. I
Mm-hmm.
said, no, you guys aren't. And I was like, why are you so against, like, don't you see what I see? And I tried to explain to them that, you know, real freedom is, it's not this. You guys are monitored. You guys are policed. This is not the kind of freedom that I'm used to.
Right.
And I tried to explain that to them. And I said, I don't mean that you guys are imprisoned. We're sort of comparing ourselves like, you know, oh, these countries are not free because their women can't do this, and their women can't do that. But then we have the same instance here. Our women aren't allowed to make reproductive decisions. You know what I mean? So there is some level of governance. Like, that's not freedom. You know what I mean? And then another instance was there was an animation that was available in Jamaica, and that same animation was available here in America, but the dialogue was different. And when I watched it here in America, I was like, what is that? And for a while, I couldn't find it until, thank God, it wasn't like a Mandela effect or anything. Like, people on TikTok was like, oh, do you remember this? And they changed it, and I was just like, I know.
Crazy, huh? Absolutely crazy. Yeah. I have so much I could talk about with that too. But you know, as we're talking about this, these are our urban issues. And my shared excitement with what Shanice is saying about the future is when that day happens, we go, oh crap, we really were brainwashed. Oh crap, and we also said this out loud, and man, the emotion that we had was baseless. And yet we build an environment based on these belief systems. Now, let me see. We have 37. I have another 5 more slides. Actually, it's 37. You know what? We'll finish. Let's finish right now. Let's talk about next class and expectations.